I'm going to go ahead and get started. My background is as a special education teacher for 31 years in the Tigard-Walton School District, and my particular area of expertise was with emotionally disturbed students, although I did a lot of work with learning disabled students, particularly in reading at secondary level. And in the work that I did, I found that one of the primary barriers for students at that secondary level was that they simply believed they couldn't get any better in what they were doing, particularly reading. And I speak from my own personal experience because I was a slow reader, although I taught myself how to read before school started when I was 4 years old. But by third grade, I was in the slow reading group. And it's primarily because at the time, this is in the early 60s, I was not taught how to pull ideas out of text. I was taught how to read the words really well because it was a very heavy phonics approach, but I was not taught how to pull ideas out of the text. So I ended up reading everything twice. And by sixth grade, I kind of just thought that's what reading was. That's what everybody did. Well, it wasn't. And so once I became a teacher, I decided I need to do something different to show kids that they actually could improve their reading. And from that, I created the Read Through It strategy. I've written a couple books about that. And you can look at my website to at studentempowermentgroup.com and get some idea of some of the articles that I've written and stuff. So I want to focus on what the students bring to the text. I believe that early on, the very act of reading a word or a part of a word or a couple of words is magical for them. And remember, when your kids are really little and you see them, then they write driving down the road and they're able to read a sign. And they're so excited about that. But I believe by about fifth or sixth grade, that's gone. Recognizing that words and stuff, all that, the runes, is no longer exciting. So where is the excitement? The magic in reading is in the ideas. And what I want to show them through this strategy is that there is stuff going on inside their mind and their mind is with them at all times. And it's the most powerful tool that they have. And if they can become alert to that, then something can happen magical for them. And I came up with this because I had a student who I call Karen, and one day she was reading to me and she came across the word little and she read it as small. And there was a couple of interesting things about that. One is it was very clear that she understood what was being said, that she had complete comprehension of that particular sentence and that passage. And secondly, she didn't know that she made that mistake. So as a result of that experience with Karen, I had two questions that came to my mind. One was, what was happening inside Karen's mind that she understood exactly what was going on, even though she misread the word? And when I raised that question, I started observing other students, and and not just my students, but adults too, are making mistakes all the time while they read. And yet comprehension is not at issue often. Sometimes, obviously, it is, but often it isn't. And even with the mistakes they made. So I asked myself, what's going on inside their mind that allows that comprehension to happen? And then secondly, how can I teach that ability? So to acknowledge that our minds are incredible, I want to do a couple of exercises with you to show just how the mind is so active and it's amazing. So I'm going to put a word on the screen and I want you to imagine something, somehow you react to that word, something comes to mind. And now what I'm going to do is put another word on that screen. I want you to pay attention to what changes. So when you see that change, I'm going to stop the share so we can have some interaction if you'd like. What what happened? What happened for you? You went from one word to two words, but something changed in your mind. Did anybody notice anything?
Yeah, you're making it. This is, oh, sorry, I should put my video on. This is Deborah, retired teacher and
Yeah.
OSLA treasurer. What happens is your brain makes that connection, right? Because it sees
Yes.
two words that when they're separately, they're individual, but when you combine them, they make two words, and that's what their brain does.
And what do you visualize?
Well,
Did you?
instinctively they're visualizing male. I mean, if they're not, having reading issues, then they see a male and they see a box and they can picture both separate things, but then, it becomes mailbox. Same thing with cup and cake, right? It does that.
Yeah.
And I'm a
Yeah.
reading specialist, so sorry I had to
Yeah.
chime in.
And a lot of students will visualize the word with the word mail, they'll look at an envelope. They'll see an envelope. That's what their head will do. But as soon as you put mailbox up, then they actually see a mailbox. And it's no longer the letter. And it adjusts like that. So I want to demonstrate one more time. Here's another word. And then I'm going to show a second word. And I'm going to ask again, what was the image change in your mind? Anyone?
For me, toy, I think I was just thinking of any toy.
Exactly.
When cat came up, I reversed it to be cat toy and not
Yes,
boy cat. I don't know
right.
why.
Exactly. And that's what I've found most people will do. They'll visualize, for myself, I visualize a little toy truck or, a fire truck or something like that. And I put up the word cat, and then I visualize like a little laser pointer or something you play with your cat. And I think that what's interesting that happens is how quickly that change happens. And it happens so automatically. There's no conscious effort on the part of the reader of those words to make that change. It just happens. And so I'm going to show you a story on your screen. And in this story, I'm going to show it for about 20, 30 seconds. And I want you to try to read the story. Okay, so that was about 25 seconds. How did you react to those words on the screen?
It's a jumbled mess and I didn't like it.
Of course, of course. Did your brain try to figure out any of the meaning?
Yeah, of
Yeah,
course.
yeah. Our brains want to make meaning out of what is put in front of us. And if it's the traffic in front of us while we're driving and we want to make sure that there's a space for us to fit, our brain just does these things automatically. We don't tell it to do that. Just like and I'm talking about secondary learners here. I'm not talking about someone who's brand new to the English language or whatever, but by the time they're in middle school or high school, they're familiar enough with words as a phenomenon that they are trying to make meaning out of these words. And in doing so, some of the words, I'll bring the screen back up. And I've actually done this with my students. I've used this to help them identify which words are nouns, which words are verbs, because you can actually discern it from the way the sentences are structured. But that's not my primary meaning in using this. Mainly, I wanted to point out that our brain wants to and actually spends effort trying to figure it out. But then, as Deborah said, it gets frustrating because these words don't have any meaning. I mean, they're nonsense. And so a lot of students will give up, right? So the goal here with my students is to try to get them to the point where they have enough meaning that they don't give up. What I'm going to, by the end of this presentation, you'll have a strategy for how to give them enough meaning that they remain engaged with the sentence and with the passage. That's the objective. So I'm going to give one more demonstration of how powerful our minds are. Is there any challenge with understanding that sentence? I mean, everybody, it's pretty obvious, but I'm going to make it a little bit more complicated and let you play around with this for about 15 or 20 seconds. So any comment on what happened inside your brain? What did you notice?
Well, for me, we know that the temporal lobe, is the understanding of a word, and the frontal lobe is the comprehension. And so when your brain is using both those lobes, of course, there's the other two, partial and the total, your vision, but you're right. Like you see the first and last letter or any little part in the between. And I think it's really improved. I think students have gotten better at this because they're so used to texting and they do that mini version anyway. But yeah, so
Oh,
your
good
brain,
point.
yeah,
Yeah.
so your brain is used to identifying quickly to understand the word. And once it's got that, it's the comprehension piece is easy. Well, it's not easy because I never learned to comprehend until I was 23 years old. So, there you go.
Yes. One of the things that I like about this particular quote is the next to last sentence down at the bottom. It says, "This is because the human mind does not read every letter by itself, but the word as a whole." And what I would even expand that and say, when they see a sentence, they don't read the whole sentence. And they don't read a word. They read multiple words. And that's why when people read aloud, you'll hear them actually skip words. They'll sometimes throw in an extra word. I mean, that happens with my students all the time, but they still get what they're saying. And if you talk to actors and actresses when they are performing, they're not exactly doing what the script said. They get into character and they alter it with that character. And so it happens all the time, these kinds of errors. And in my book, I call them positive errors, which I'm not going to explore at this point in time, or in this presentation. But it is a phenomenon that is, I think, fascinating because it indicates that something is going on to aid comprehension inside their brains while they are reading. And that's what I want to present to you from this point on, of how do you use this fascinating power of our minds? How do you use it so that the students can take advantage of that? So I'm going to introduce something that I call idea units. And I didn't create this phrase. I don't know where it came from, but Tim Rosinski, who is a fluency expert from Kent State University, he says that comprehension while reading doesn't happen at the word level or the sentence level. It happens at the phrase level. So, and what he means by that is that if you look at a full sentence, a whole bunch of stuff could be happening inside that sentence. But if you look, and that can be confusing for a student trying to take in a whole sentence. They might struggle with a particular word. They might struggle with the phraseology and how the author is using a particular word or a particular phrase. So there are different kinds of difficulties that arise at the whole sentence level. Similarly, if you only look at the word, you may get the student to be able to understand that word, but they have to understand it in the context of the whole sentence to really get what the author is trying to say. So an idea unit is that size of a group of words that's enough to create an image or an idea, and importantly, that it's relevant to the author's message. So it's not just a standalone word, and I'll demonstrate that in a second, but it is, and it's relevant to what the author is trying to say. Also, an idea unit is not so much information that it's more than a building block. So I think of a sentence maybe have 3 or 4 different idea units. If they understand each one, then they can understand the whole sentence. Or they will at least understand what they don't understand, which is also important. So I'm going to go back to another example, and I'm going to build on this example now. When I show this word, as the author, I'm presenting you a text. You see this word, and every one of us says or reacts in some way to this word. And it may be the dog that you've had. It may be a reaction to a dog that you've had. It may be an emotion, but there's some kind of reaction. Then I throw in this word, and now you are starting to put together a concept. So as an author, I wrote down dog street, but you really don't know what I'm talking about. But you, because your brain wants to comprehend, you're starting to tell a story just with these 2 words. However, none of the story inside your mind is consistent with what I mean as the author at this point in time. And interestingly, we each have a different meaning of these words. So for example, when I write down the word street, in your mind, maybe you grew up in New York City and your street is like a busy metropolitan intersection. I grew up in a small town, and for me, a street is got driveways and cars parked on the street and trees, maybe the garbage cans out on the edge, stuff like that. All those images come to my life, into my head when I see the word street, but they don't necessarily agree with what I, as the author, was trying to say. But those images are helpful for comprehension because you have more than just this pavement in your head. And so we want to alert students to those other images that they're creating. Now, let's see how that works. The dog ran down the street. That is a complete idea unit because it's enough words that you're starting to get an understanding of what I, as the author, am trying to portray. But it's not so many words that it's too complicated. So that's a single idea unit. Chasing the mail truck, that's a second idea unit in this sentence. So you are now getting a sense of what I am as the author, what I'm trying, a message. And your image of street might still be the same as what you started with, either metropolitan or a suburb or a country lane or whatever it was. That hasn't changed any, but you're starting to get a sense of what I'm trying to portray to you as the author. And that's the end of the sentence. So that's a whole sentence. And if you build it one idea unit at a time, some interesting things happen inside our brains. One is that we start to make adjustments. Okay, so that if you started and a metropolitan center, then that may not work so well with the master hot on its tail running down the middle of the street with all these other cars. So you might actually make an adjustment in what your image of the street was. Maybe you did or maybe you didn't. But those kinds of changes happen while you continue reading. What's important is that if we teach our students to become alert to what's happening, then that helps them with their comprehension. Now, a couple things I wanted to point out here also. One is, look at the last part, the word hot. In this context is idiomatic. And those kinds of words are troublesome for students who are English language learners. And so what's helpful about using idea units as the unit of comprehension is they don't have to exactly know what the word hot means in this context to still get a sense of what's going on in this scene. And then you can make hot as a point of discussion. Well, what do they mean by that? And so you're teaching them some English odd vocabulary, but they can participate in it because they can get a sense of the whole of what's happening, even they may not know the detail of what's happening. So I want to point that out. And then the second thing I want to point out is that the question is, how do we find where the idea units are? If you were to read a sentence, and I'm going to demonstrate this in a second, but if you were to read a sentence out loud as if you were reading to a child, you would find that there's a slight pause at the end of an idea unit. So you read this out loud, it's going to go, the dog ran down the street, pause, chasing the mail truck, pause, with its master hot on its tail. And those pauses come at natural moments in the structure of the English language. And in fact, when you read them out loud, that's actually when we take in a breath or let out a breath or manage our breath in some way. And you can teach your students to be alert to that, and they can find those pause points, and that will identify for them an idea unit that they can either understand or not understand. And so the third thing I want to point out in that context is that, and this was shown to me by my students, I did not predict this. They said that this, particularly my students with really serious ADHD issues, they said that they could, because of using idea units, they could find where they lost track of their focus in the text more readily. So they would still go wandering off as ADD students do, but they could come back more readily because they were dividing the sentence up into idea units, so they could figure out where they lost track. That I did not expect when I started teaching this, but it was fascinating. Okay, I had a student who, he was a really good reader. In fact, teachers were calling on him to read out loud because he'd read so proficiently. But he said that he could not understand anything that he read. He had to go back and read it again to understand it. So I told him, I want you to read at a pace that you understand rather than for a demonstration. And so he read words to me that somewhere around 80 to 90 words per minute. Whereas before, when he was reading for his classes, he could read 125, 120, 130 words per minute. But he had to slow down to 80 or 90. So I taught him this thing about idea units, and he got to the point where he was reading with me 140 words per minute because he was paying attention to the idea units and he could keep with the comprehension at the same time. And before I retired, and then another teacher took over for me, and she got him up to 160 words per minute. And he started telling his teachers that he was going to go to college, which was never an option in his mind. He always thought, I'm such a slow reader and it takes me so much struggle to understand. But he got to 160 words per minute with 80% comprehension. He said, I could do college. It was pretty exciting. The other thing that happens is that students still make mistakes when they read aloud. And what I tell them to do is just read through it because you may get it by the end of the thing. And so one of my students said, "You mean I don't have to fix my mistakes?" And I said, "If you understand what you're reading, don't worry about your mispronunciations. If you're getting a picture of what's going on." And she was so excited. And she jumped to about 125 words per minute within a couple of weeks. And what more importantly, she also she stopped avoiding doing the reading part of assignments. She used to just go straight to the questions and try to guess the answers. And she stopped avoiding the reading because she didn't worry so much about getting things all correct. And she was using the context to fill in what she didn't understand, and it was working for her. Okay, so now I'm going to give you an example of how this works, but I want you to remember, we're not going for 100% comprehension. What we're going for is number 2 here is the engagement. Is if they can engage with the text, then you've tackled something. They're not giving up. And that's where idea units is really helpful. So here's an example. Now notice where I pause. Accustomed to human beings, he moved without fear about the scattered farms of the region, raiding barns and hen runs that other foxes wouldn't have dared to go near. Now, if you read from an idea unit's perspective, accustomed to human beings is the first pause. In your brain, you automatically know that we are talking about something that is non-human. Now, it could be an alien from another planet, but it could also be an animal. So you know your brain is talking like this already with just those first 4 words. He moved without fear. He moved without fear. Okay, got that. He's running around without being scared. About the scattered farms of the region. Now, that sentence automatically goes back to the first part, and you start thinking, okay, we're talking animals, we're not talking aliens from outer space. I could be wrong still. And that's really important. It still could be making a mistake. But what's exciting about this is that they now are starting to put connections together. And they've got 3 different idea units that have been used. Raiding barns and hen runs that other foxes wouldn't have dared to go near. Now we know that these are foxes, these are animals. And you know that by the end. But you've done it because you've put together all the pieces along the way, not by going all the way to the end and then asking the question. A lot of comprehension exercises involve asking of questions after they've finished the paragraph or after they've finished a certain section. Well, often there's too much information. They've been lost for too long to fully understand even the question and how it relates, or they've given up. What idea units does is it gives them the chance to piece together one bit by one bit the idea of the sentence, the idea that the author is trying to portray. Does anyone have any questions or anything about this? I'm going to show another example, but is this making sense? Okay. Now, this is an example from my book. So this is nonfiction. I want you to read it paying attention to the pauses. And the importance of this, using this example, is to demonstrate, obviously, that this technique applies with nonfiction and fiction, that something is developing inside their brains as they go. And that something does 2 things. One is it gives them the confidence that they are getting something. And if you create a culture in your classroom that it's okay to make mistakes and that it's okay to not understand things, then they can identify, okay, I get everything but this one part here. And they can identify the part that they don't quite get more readily because they understand parts around the part that they don't get. And that's a significant skill for them to develop. And that skill doesn't always come if you're expecting them to read the whole passage and then ask questions, because they don't have the confidence that they can get it. But by doing one idea unit at a time, they can trust themselves that they're getting something. Okay, I'm checking my notes to make sure I'm not forgetting something. How are we doing for time? 12 minutes. Okay. Okay, so the activity that you can teach, and you can start this on Monday. I mean, you can start doing this pausing thing as soon as you present a paragraph to your students. And you can do it for them. Say, and start exaggerating the pause just a little bit and let them absorb. You're basically what you're doing is you're allowing the brain to do what it naturally does. Remember the Flingle-Dobie story. Your brain wants to understand. Well, their brains want to understand also, but if you give them that extra little pause between the idea units, it gives their brain that opportunity. Now, another place where this is applicable is when you give them exercises that has fill in the blanks. And I'm going to demonstrate how this works. At one time or another, everyone has stopped to blank about the weather. That could be, I'm going to say think, might be wrong, but think. Some days the weather is good. Some days the weather is horrible, not so good, whatever. Still, there are days when the weather seems to blank from hour to that's probably change. Okay. And I didn't know what to put there for a moment, so I had to finish reading the sentence. The point here is if you have your students paying attention to what's going on inside their brain, they start filling in the blanks, even though they may not have it correct. And then they can go back and change it later. So, and here's an example of that. A day starts out blank, because I don't know how it's going to start out, might not keep its promise. So obviously, a day starts out good, but you don't know that until you finish the sentence. But your brain puts something there. Sometimes the day that seems bad turns out great or marvelous or whatever, and you know that because of what was said before. So this is an area, filling in the blanks. A lot of students will just go straight to the blank and try to put a word in there that might work. What this does, by becoming alert to what their brain is doing in a step-by-step, idea unit by idea unit way, they put in words that work. And they may not be correct, but they work. And then they can go back and change them later if something else works better. So here's another example. How much time have I got? 8 minutes. Okay. Now, this is from a piece by Jane Goodall. I'll just let you play around with it for a bit. What I like about this passage is there's so many possibilities of what could go into the words, but when you put it all together, you get a clear image of what was going on. So the specifics of the answers don't become as important so long as the kids get the general sense. One of the first things that I do when I teach now I'm teaching adults because I'm retired, but when I teach my students is I teach the word gist. Gist. If they're getting the gist of what's being said, then just keep going forward. And don't worry about the details. And that's one reason I like this passage. Once I walked through the blank forest in a downpour. That could be tropical forest, dense forest, whatever. I mean, a lot of words you could put in there, right? But you get a sense of what's going on. I suddenly saw a chimp hunched in blank of me. I'm going to say in front of me. Quickly, I stopped. Then I heard a noise from above. Could be sound, noise, something. I looked up and there was a big chimp there too. When he saw me, he gave a yell, clear, wailing, spine-chilling call, something. I mean, what's interesting is lots of different words could go in those passages, but because you understand the parts of the sentence around the word, then you can plug in something that makes sense. Obviously, if you're grading for an exact the exact correct one single word, then this is going to be a challenge because one of the things that I find is that students bring so much. It's kind of like go back to the example of the street thing. Student street is different from my street, right? But that doesn't make theirs wrong. It's just a different image. It only becomes wrong as the author starts filling in more information. And if the author starts saying things like white picket fence and fences in the front yard, and the student is stuck in his metropolitan busy intersection, then the student is wrong. But until then, the student's image is just as valid as my image. And that's important to keep in mind while you're helping your students go through these things. Okay, so one of the things I want to emphasize at this point is what I'm teaching about the use of idea units is a skill. It's not a piece of knowledge. I don't just suddenly know that this is happening. This is something they could do and they start doing it. It's a skill that you have to teach. So here is how you practice teaching it. It's by something that I call cycle reading. And cycle reading is essentially, and I'll demonstrate in a second, but essentially reading a piece once, then going back and reading it a second time, then continuing on reading the next section for the first time and go back and read that a second time, then go read the next section for the first time, then go back and read for a second time. So it's cycling, you're reading everything twice. And if you do this and exaggerating the pauses, then they will get used to how the system works and they'll start using cycle reading as a tool. But you have to give them the opportunity to practice. I recommend 3 minutes, 5 minutes of practice for about every day for about a month. And usually they'll get it by then. I have found that I actually use the exaggerated pause even today when I come across a passage that's particularly dense and difficult to understand, or interestingly, if I'm having a hard time focus because I'm distracted by my life, that using exaggerated pausing and idea units helps me come back to and focus on the passage in front of me. So they will feel like they're going slow at first, but interestingly, once they get into it, then they don't do it so automatically. So they stop doing the pausing when they don't need to. So they read just regularly the sentences that are coming fluidly, but then they get to a point, oh, wait, don't get this, I'll go back and do idea units, and it helps them. So it becomes a tool that they use when they need to. Essentially, this is a description of cycle reading. It's what I just said. Read one paragraph or a section, takes about 15 to 20 seconds. Use a grade level material that allows relatively little struggle. This is for practicing cycle reading and just for doing the practice. Then you go back and read it again. Then you read the next section, etc. So this is just a description. The other parts of the read through it strategy are the I stops and positive errors. I mentioned positive errors. I stops has to do with fluency exercise to develop the musculature around their eyes so they move at pace. I did not present that today, but it is in my book. And today was just about idea units. Any questions? You have 2 minutes.